We are now to chapter 28 on Woodrow Wilson. And this is one of those first presidents, other than maybe Teddy Roosevelt and a few, that people kind of remember. They start like, yeah, I've heard about that guy. I remember World War I, the League of Nations, the 14-point plan. Got it. I'm starting to kind of remember some of that stuff from American history on a president that's not on Mount Rushmore, one of the more recent presidents. I take the opportunity in this chapter to talk a little bit about kind of a family connection. My grandmother survived the 1918 flu pandemic, and wasn't expected to. Her brother neither. They both did, luckily, and obviously from my telling. But I go through the opportunity where I was sitting with her as she was near the end of her life, and we were watching the Minnesota Twins, the baseball team, on television, and she was talking with me. She had an opportunity to talk with me a little bit about the 1918 pandemic. This is years ago, and how really devastating and bad that it was. And, now, thinking of the COVID-19 pandemic as the obvious parallel, the only one that's even close. Key differences between the two from a biological perspective. I'm not qualified to answer those questions anyway. But from a kind of messaging and marketing and communications perspective, there are a ton of similarities. And I want to read you just a part of those similarities that we draw in some of the branding between the 1918 flu pandemic and the COVID-19 pandemic, just to give you a little taste of the comparison that we're able to make, looking at it back kind of from an advertising person's lens, how similar they really are. So here's the excerpt. It's fascinating and saddening to me how similar the 1918 flu pandemic and the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic really are. Not from a virology perspective, I'm not qualified to compare them in any case, but rather from a human psychology perspective. No matter how much our technology may have changed, many features of the COVID-19 pandemic mirror its most analogous predecessor more than 100 years ago in three distinct ways: branding, information management, and consumer response. For the 1918 flu pandemic, the technical name is an H1N1 and its variants. The branded name, however, was the Spanish flu, or Spanish lady. Why was that? The first reliable news reports solidified the impression that the flu was Spanish in origin. Later research showed that that was almost certainly not the case, but the brand name stuck. Recent historians have attempted to rebrand the disease as the 1918 flu pandemic, as I have done here, but that's a recent development. It was still the Spanish flu when my grandmother talked to me about it in the early 2000s. The reason is simple. First impressions are critically important. In fact, venture capitalists often implore startups to strive for first mover advantage for precisely this reason. The first entrant in the market gets to decide how to frame the product category for everyone who comes after. Let's take a look at how similar that is to the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. The technical name for that disease was coronavirus disease 2019, formerly 2019 novel coronavirus, or 2019 nCoV, SARS-CoV-2, kind of the beta version. The branded name is simply coronavirus, COVID-19, the Chinese coronavirus, also Wuhan coronavirus, named for the city the disease is thought to have originated. The second name is a bit opportunistic, used by those who want to brand the virus as a Chinese threat for their own political purposes. That's not only happening in the United States, but in nationalist political wings in many countries. That's not... skip there. To attempt to brand the disease as Chinese is an effort to create a more easily personified outside enemy. However, it doesn't seem to be sticking. In a highly science technology-focused society, especially over the past 30 years, the general public is more comfortable with technical names than in past decades. Swine flu and avian flu are notable exceptions. As we learned in 1918, the first names used to describe something new are powerful. That said, confusion remains in the general public about the distinction between the generic term coronavirus, a class of viruses that includes versions of the common cold, and COVID-19, the specific virus responsible for the current pandemic, and so-called variants from the United Kingdom and South Africa and many other places. So in the chapter, I go through information management, how information spreads, as well as kind of the consumer response. This is a really interesting chapter, and although it's written and published in 2021 here on July 4th, as you know, as I've told you, it is coming. It's on its way. It's all queued up in Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all those places. I suspect that this particular chapter will age well, and that's because there are so many similarities. We can apply this same sort of methodology to many other kind of past and future events. The past doesn't repeat. That's one of those kind of common misconceptions, but does rhyme. So important to think about and kind of gather our information about how that might work and what we can learn from that in the future.